Welcome to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. My name is Andrew Garrison. This is a show where we talk about sports in the state of Indiana, and it is a very busy day to be a fan of sports in the state of Indiana. We have quite a bit to talk about today. We're going to talk about the national championship game. Notre Dame is playing Ohio State in the national championship game on Monday. We're going to preview that. First, we're going to talk about the Pacers. We're going to talk about what life is like without Tyrese Haliburton. He got injured and he's going to be out for a couple more games most likely. We're going to talk about IU basketball. They took a hard loss to Illinois at home just a couple days ago. In a couple days from now, Purdue plays Oregon, and we're going to talk about that game as well. Then we'll finish up the show talking about the NFL playoffs and what could happen to lead to the Washington Commanders upsetting the Detroit Lions and what that would mean for both teams. Thank you so much for tuning in to the show. We're going to start with Notre Dame. Now, the one thing that is a bit making me nervous about this episode is the lighting. So I'm recording this episode during the day. Usually I record these episodes in the morning when it's still dark because it's wintertime. And a lot of times it just makes the lighting's totally fine because I have a light just above the camera. But last time I recorded during the day, it was strange. It was dark. It was dim. It didn't look good. And it's a lot of weird stuff going on. The sun's out, but also it's very snowy outside. That could be an issue. I feel like my lighting last time, my light was offset from my face. So I really don't know how this episode is going to look. I apologize if it's dim or dark, but we're doing the best we can here today. All right, let's talk about Notre Dame. National championship game preview and prediction. They are playing the Ohio State Buckeyes. And the number one thing I want to say, because Ohio State's favored by over a touchdown. And you're going to see as I work through the predictions, you're going to see how much I think it maybe would be a tall task for Notre Dame to pull out a win in this game. I want you to appreciate this moment. If you're a Notre Dame fan, appreciate this moment. If you're not a Notre Dame fan, but if you're a fan of college football, I want you to appreciate this moment because Notre Dame is here. And Notre Dame is in one of the biggest brands, one of the most unique brands in college football. They're in the national championship game despite a litany of key injuries. It's a testament to Marcus Freeman's culture. It's a testament to the team that he's put together. Notre Dame may lose, right? 100%. Ohio State's favored by 9.5, or at least it was 9.5 at the time that I wrote that. I'm sure that there's been money on one or the other side for this game. Notre Dame may lose, and they may lose by a lot, but they got here. And the way they did that is undoubtedly honorable. They took a real tough loss to Northern Illinois at the beginning of the year. If you're like me, at least in week 2, right, that early in the year, the conversation partially was that maybe Notre Dame misses the playoff entirely because we didn't know that the SEC was going to completely blow itself up. We didn't know that the ACC was going to have a couple teams stumble like they did. We're looking at Miami. We're in some ways looking at Clemson, although obviously they ended up, or not Clemson, I'm sorry, SMU, but of course SMU ended up getting in anyway. The conversation was that maybe Notre Dame was going to miss the playoff entirely after that loss, especially if they took another one, but they didn't. They started blowing out teams, and they marched all the way to the playoff, and once they got there, continued to dominate teams until the semifinals, in which case they squeaked past Penn State. So the fact that Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame, this independent school, not in a conference, they get here and they go to the national championship game. And yeah, the playoff format is a little bit messed up. The way they set this whole thing up is a little bit askew. And maybe these aren't truly the two best teams in the country because they had obscure paths to get there. But at the end of the day, Ohio State beat the number 1 team and Notre Dame beat the number 2 team. So it's not the worst national championship that we've seen, that we've ever seen. Notre Dame is here, right? They got here. I want this to be appreciated. And before I preview this game and basically explain to you all the reasons why it's going to be very difficult for Notre Dame to win, I want this to be appreciated because this may not happen again in the near future. This may not happen again ever. And certainly in the next few years, it might be very difficult for Notre Dame to mount a great season, a miraculous season, a wonderful season like they have in this one. So let's talk about Ohio State. Team profile, right? Everyone probably watching this show has watched Ohio State this year. You probably know what you're looking at, and obviously very world-renowned program. They lost to Michigan, and then they won 3 playoff games, 42-17 versus the 7th team in the country, Tennessee, 41-21 against the number 1 team in Oregon, and 28-14 versus number 3, Texas. Remember, that was a one-possession game for the majority of it. Jack Sawyer had that strip sack return touchdown to make it 2 possessions at the very end of the game. So that game was closer the entire time than maybe 28-14 suggests, even though that's not the widest margin of victory either. The thing about Ohio State, especially in the playoff, has been their unrelenting defense. They're number one in the country in opponents' points per game. They hold teams to an average of 12.2 points per game all year. That counts the regular season, that counts the playoffs. Their opponents' yards per game as well is very strong. 250.1 total. That's running, that's passing. Combined, they're at 250. And opponent yards per play, 3.9, very high in those categories as well. Effectively a top 3 run defense, a top 10 pass defense. They're number 1 in opponents' pass yards per game. Now, the biggest thing to me, so I just talked about how they can stop the run. I just talked about how they have a great secondary. And those are 2 of the 3 primary pieces of a defense. The third is the pass rush. And Ohio State, maybe during the playoffs, this has been their best quality on defense. They had 4 sacks against Texas. They've had, I believe, 16 sacks across those 3 games as a whole. 9 TFLs against Texas as well. And on top of that, Notre Dame still is missing their starting center from way earlier in the year. And Anthony Knapp, their offensive tackle, is going to be out. So Notre Dame, even since last game, is going to have, and if you took the 5 starting linemen from last game and said this is the best they've got, which it wasn't, but if it was, still you're taking away a key player in that offensive tackle, taking him out of that lineup for Ohio State. So Ohio State, one of the best defenses in the country, certainly during the playoffs, the best pass rush in the country, is going against a weakened Notre Dame offensive line. The defense has been, again, absolutely unrelenting. 12.2 points per game is how many the opponents of the Ohio State Buckeyes have had throughout the year. On the other side of the ball, they, of course, have a talent-laden offense, and this is why Ohio State is playing the way that they are. Will Howard, Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Carnell Tate, Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith. That's just a list of, 6 players right there that all absolutely could be NFL guys and can take over a game on their own. Jeremiah Smith is going to be a massive threat. He was kind of taken away by Texas in some ways, but it doesn't matter because Carnell Tate and Emeka Egbuka, of course, that pair of running backs, Ohio State's going to have ways to beat you somehow offensively, and that's paired with the fact that their defense is going to give their offense plenty of chances to take leads and extend leads. So how Notre Dame can win this game is it's very difficult, right? It's going to be very difficult. It's going to be an upset. It's going to have to be a real heavy effort for Notre Dame if they're going to be able to knock off what really is maybe not the number 1 team in the country, but certainly playing like the number 1 team in the country. And of course, naturally, whoever wins the national championship is going to be considered the number 1 team in the country. So Ohio State is probably the most difficult college football team to play on Monday. Ohio State's the most difficult one to go against. So Notre Dame's keys to win, right? Number 1 is what I'm calling accepting the gambit, all right? Notre Dame is going to have to accept the gambit of Ohio State playing great defense. Ohio State is going to fluster Riley Leonard. They're going to lock down your receivers, especially because Notre Dame's receiving room is maybe not one of the top few in the country, and they're going to stuff the run. Jeremiah Love is going to struggle. He hasn't had 100 yards in a game since the game against Indiana, and even that one was a little bit iffy because of that big run very early on in the game. Of course, that touchdown, if you take away that one play, then the stats are very different there. Of course, you can't. That counts, but still, Jeremiah Love didn't have 100 yards against Georgia, didn't have 100 yards against Penn State. Riley Leonard, I believe, outrushed him both times. He certainly did in the Georgia game. So Ohio State, they're going to stuff the run. They're going to lock away your receivers. They're going to get to Riley Leonard. They're going to play great defense, and Notre Dame probably isn't going to be able to score. Sure, this is the national championship game, but Ohio State has played some great teams all year, and like I said, Tennessee, high-powered offense, hold them to 17. Oregon held them to 21. Texas held them to 14. Michigan held them to 10, right? And maybe Michigan offensively isn't the best example, but if Ohio State is holding teams to an average of 12.2 points per game, naturally Notre Dame is going to struggle to score. So what Notre Dame needs to do is really just accept that and keep the game low scoring, because the one thing Ohio State definitely can do is get going out of the gate and keep going and continue rolling that ball down the hill. And the next thing you know, Ohio State has 42 on the board or 41 on the board. Tennessee and Oregon have a lot to say about that. The team that showed the most fight and seemed like they had the most high chance of knocking off Ohio State in the playoff was Texas. And they kept Ohio State to 21 points for the vast majority of that game until, of course, that blunder in the fourth quarter. So Texas, really at the end of the day, was down one possession with the ball in the red zone, and they were in that spot. The only team that's really put themselves in that close of a position to beat Ohio State was Texas, and they kept the game as low scoring as possible. It's very hard to stay on pace with Ohio State. And Notre Dame, by the way, does not have the offense that can keep pace with Ohio State. If they go up 2 scores right away, Riley Leonard, we know, it's a given known about Notre Dame that they don't really have the ability to throw the ball down the field as well as maybe they would like to. With Riley Leonard and those receivers, Notre Dame doesn't play well from behind. They've come back from a 10-point deficit against Penn State, but for the most part, that's it. If Ohio State gets going out of the gate like we know they can and like we know they have against Tennessee and Oregon, it may very well be just a lost game from there, and Notre Dame's going to get blown away. So accept that gambit. Say, all right, if you're going to lock down our offense, we're going to do the same thing to you, at least the most that we can. It doesn't have to mean that Notre Dame has to jump out to an early lead, because we know that their team is built to play well from leads. That's how they've blown out some of these teams, is they start up 10-0 and then they just cruise from there because Jeremiah Love can run against anybody, it felt, at least throughout the season, and that offense can certainly keep humming throughout the game. So on defense, if at the end of the day, if this is going to start on defense, if Notre Dame keeping this game low scoring is going to start on defense, which it is, because Ohio State locking down your offense really has nothing to do with your own abilities. If you're going to slow down Ohio State, you have to have elite pass defense, all right? And that is what they are. Notre Dame has one of the best secondaries in the country. That's a fact. That's their best strength on this team, maybe besides Jeremiah Love, but certainly in the playoff and recently, their number one quality has been that pass defense. Conversely, Will Howard is the best quarterback that they played against all year long, all right? Notre Dame has not played against a quarterback at the level of Will Howard. Drew Aller counts. Gunnar Stockton counts. Maybe if Carson Beck was in that game and they had won, then that's a better example. But Will Howard is the best quarterback that Notre Dame has had to face all year long, which means that this is a new challenge that Notre Dame hasn't quite had to tackle, okay? That's going to mean a couple things, because you're going to have to force him to make mistakes. You're going to have to force the pressure onto him, because Will Howard's not going to make mistakes on his own. You could make an argument that Notre Dame was bailed out by Drew Aller's interception at the end of the game. And of course, the secondary had to make that play, but that decision from Drew Aller was honestly horrific, and Will Howard is not going to make a mistake like that. Drew Aller gave the game to Notre Dame. Will Howard in that spot, in that position, would not give the game away to Notre Dame in the same way, most likely. So if we just copy and paste these two games and restart, if we fast forward to this game, we find it's 24-24 with just over a minute left like it was, and Ohio State has the ball and it's Will Howard and his receivers, that's not how that drive goes. It's not an easy interception that Notre Dame just has to routinely pick up, march like 20 yards down the field and kick a field goal. That's not going to happen. If it's Ohio State in that situation, Ohio State's probably scoring and they're probably winning, because, again, you're going to have to force the mistakes out of Will Howard. With that pressure, you're going to have to overwhelm him. It's going to be very difficult and maybe impossible to force him to make the same or similar mistakes that Drew Aller did, but he's definitely not just going to do it to himself, right? He's definitely not going to just do it on his own. You could argue that Notre Dame loses to Penn State if Penn State had better quarterback play on that day. Drew Aller was missing throws. He threw some interceptions. He made mistakes. There certainly were some open receivers that he just missed. If Will Howard's on that Penn State team, Penn State's probably playing in the national championship game right now. Obviously, he wasn't. Notre Dame won. They're here. But the point is, now they have to play Will Howard. Now they have to play this team in Ohio State that, again, is a much more well-oiled machine under Ryan Day, arguably. And it's going to be much more difficult to force the mistakes out of this quarterback and this offense. The other thing for Notre Dame is going to be turnovers and splash play prevention, and this goes on both sides. Notre Dame is one of the best teams in the country at turning the ball over. They turn the ball over. They keep care of the ball themselves as well. They're going to take away the ball from Ohio State probably at least once. I don't know how. I don't know when. I don't know in what situation that would occur. But Notre Dame's good at that. That's one of their biggest strengths, is turning the ball over. So you first of all have to carry out that. You have to execute in that way. If Notre Dame doesn't win the turnover battle, they probably don't win the game, right? Notre Dame they've gotten here through turnovers in a lot of ways. In a lot of situations, they've gotten here through turnovers. And a great example is the Georgia game at the end of the first half. They took that ball away, and that's a 14-point swing. And then, of course, the game-sealing interception, mostly until that field goal went through against Penn State. Another great example, but across the board, they're one of the best teams at turning the ball over. They have to maintain that against Ohio State, which, again, is going to be difficult because Will Howard's not going to throw bad balls like maybe Drew Aller did. But across the board, Notre Dame's going to have to turn the ball over. They're going to have to win the turnover battle. And then similarly, they're going to have to limit the big plays downfield, right? Because that's Ohio State can really, really kill you, is when you have the receivers that Ohio State has and when you have the quarterback that's feeding the ball to them. And when they have that speed and they have that athletic ability against a Notre Dame secondary that, albeit maybe is one of the best in the country, it also is to some degree injured. Benjamin Morrison is still out. So Ohio State, that's how they can really beat you. And that's what they did against Oregon, it felt, was when they beat you over the top, when they throw the ball 40 yards down the field and end up scoring, that's when Ohio State runs away with it. And again, Notre Dame can't play from behind. At least they haven't been able to play from behind yet. And when I say behind, I really mean 14 points or more. Because, sure, they came back from 10-0 at close to the end of the first half against Penn State. But that's not going to be something that's necessarily replicable against Ohio State in the national championship game compared to the national semifinal game. So Riley Leonard, he's going to have to play well. He's going to have to be successful on the ground. He can't be making big mistakes against that Ohio State secondary. Ohio State, they're going to take away their receivers. They're going to take away Jeremiah Love, most likely. Can Riley Leonard make something happen on the ground himself? That's going to be a question that Notre Dame has to answer. And then on the other side of the ball, it's whether or not they can really keep the game closer to the line of scrimmage there and avoid those big 40-yard chunk plays from Ohio State. Notre Dame has been good at avoiding those. They let up a couple against Georgia. They did not against Penn State for the most part. If Ohio State's able to get those big splash plays and they win the turnover battle, I think that's all they need. I think the game's over from there, just because Ohio State naturally is more talented and is a much better team than Notre Dame is on paper. So Notre Dame, it's going to come down to staying afloat defensively and finding ways to win on offense, right? If you're maintaining a drive and you find yourself at the 25-yard line, that has to be a touchdown, right? If you're playing well and you have a well-run drive going, you're at 7 plays and 5 minutes, something along those lines, that has to be a scoring drive. Notre Dame's going to have to find ways to score on offense and win on offense while just staying afloat defensively and keeping Ohio State from running away with it. Because the second they start to run away with it, it's only going to get worse from there. If Ohio State goes up 2 touchdowns, if they go up 3 possessions, the game's over. I don't think Notre Dame has any chance of coming back from a 3-possession deficit. So limit big plays. Notre Dame's got to succeed on the ground, but really, at the end of the day, it's about keeping it low scoring. Because who are the teams that had the best chance of beating Ohio State all year? In the first game against Oregon, I'm going to nix because Oregon, of course, had that win avenged in the playoffs. Michigan beat Ohio State 13-10. They kept it low scoring. Texas had the best chance of any team since then, and it was 28-14, 21-14 down the stretch, right? Keep it low scoring. Defense has got to be the focus, and just find ways to score offensively. Because if Ohio State lets up if pass interference calls start falling your way against Ohio State, those are the type of things you need to take advantage of, especially as you get to the red zone. I don't think that will happen. I think that Ohio State's going to roll. I think their offense is going to be totally fine. Maybe it's low scoring, but again, it was low scoring against Texas, and they managed to pull out the victory there. I don't think Notre Dame has the ability to come from behind, and I think they'll have to at least once. Whether the game starts out pretty evenly scored and Ohio State pulls away at the beginning of the second half, I don't think Notre Dame's going to come back from that. Or maybe Ohio State starts right away really hot out of the gate. I just think that the way this pass rush has been playing, I think Riley Leonard's going to be put in some very difficult positions, and he's going to have mistakes forced out of him. I really just think this Ohio State defense is too much for Notre Dame. I don't think they're going to be able to handle it, especially as injured as they are. I don't think that they have the personnel to be able to contend with that. So that could be what it comes down to as well. But if Notre Dame's going to win, Riley Leonard's going to have to be able to gain significant yardage running the ball and really bail out the offense in certain situations. They're going to have to win the turnover battle. They're going to have to keep this game low scoring and keep Ohio State from making some of those splash plays that they did against Oregon. It's going to be difficult. Ohio State is favored by 8, 9.5 at this point. I think they win, and I think they cover, and I think that this game isn't truly close anytime past the second quarter. Okay, let's talk about the Pacers. I want to talk about life without Tyrese Haliburton. The Pacers, they played the Cavaliers twice. We talked about the first game, made a video about that. You can look from just a couple days ago there if you would like. Beat the Cavaliers on the road, return home, again without Tyrese Haliburton. Tyrese Haliburton was out for the entire second half. The first time they played, he only had 2 points on the day. He got injured very early in the first. Second game in Gainbridge, Tyrese Haliburton is out the entire way. We thought it was a hamstring re-aggravation. Really, it's a groin strain, which makes me feel better, right? Rick Carlisle said he's going to be day-to-day. They play the Pistons. I'm not sure if Tyrese Haliburton's going to be playing at that game. At last check, he was still very questionable, arguably doubtful. I imagine he's going to miss Thursday at Detroit and have a chance maybe against Philly over the weekend. But it makes me feel better that it was a groin strain and not another hamstring injury, because this is the same hamstring, theoretically, that he injured last year throughout the season and then re-aggravated in the playoffs. So the Pacers lost to the Cavs 127-117. It was a very respectable loss. They stayed in it the whole time. This was a Donovan Mitchell takeover game, and this is what happens in the NBA sometimes, is your superstar on any given team just all bets are off. They take over. They drop 40. Mitchell ended with 34 points, and there really was no contesting superstar presence on the other side because Tyrese Haliburton was out. Donovan Mitchell is one of those guys that I spoke about who can take over and win a game like this. He's one of the big-time quality pieces for the playoffs, and Tyrese Haliburton is that for the Pacers. So the Cavaliers, right? They have Donovan Mitchell, and they have obviously other great players. But every team, definitely all playoff teams in the NBA, have a player like this that can just take over. Donovan Mitchell, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Jalen Brunson is who I was thinking of, right? Giannis, Dame. We can keep going. Tyrese Haliburton is that guy for the Pacers. He fits that role as a number one star that can take over and take a team to another level. And that's effectively exactly what he did against, or it's just throughout the playoffs last year with that Bucks series and the Knicks series as well. So the Pacers, they don't have their star in Tyrese Haliburton. So if Donovan Mitchell's dropping 34, there was really no one to match that level of success. No one else really fills that role. Siakam had 20. This illustrates this point perfectly. Siakam had 23 points. That parried Garland's 24. Garland is that supplemental number 2. Siakam is the Pacers' supplemental number 2. Maybe Siakam can pop for 30 or 40, but that's just not his role on the team. That's not what he exists to do. That's what Tyrese Haliburton exists to do. And so Siakam can kind of lead the charge on off nights for Tyrese Haliburton when he's still there. But without Tyrese Haliburton, to expect Pascal Siakam to play the way he plays, it's not going to work. It's not going to happen. Championship teams need their superstars. The Pacers need Tyrese. It was encouraging to me that somehow the Pacers managed to work themselves into this spot where they only lose by 10 at the end of this one, right? And it was close the whole way. Andrew Nembhard. So Tyrese Haliburton was out. Andrew Nembhard filled in at point guard. He has his limits, and those limits are sort of circumvented by Tyrese Haliburton. The NBA really works one particular way now offensively across the board, and that's where your point guard or one of your guards drives inside to the basket. If the shot's there, great. If it's not there, you draw the defense in, you kick it out for a 3, and since it's the NBA and it feels like everyone can shoot for the 3 at this point, that's typically the way offenses try to maximize their efficiency on offense. Nembhard has his limits, though. He's small, right? He's a smaller guy, smaller guard, and he didn't match up well with how sizable Cleveland was, because if there's one thing we know about Cleveland, it's how big they are. And so Andrew Nembhard driving inside, he kind of ran out of space. He had the ball taken away from him a couple times, and certainly there was no shot down low, basically leaving him to kick it out. Now, Nembhard happens to be incredible, and he was twisting around and found a couple jumpers to put some 2s up on the board. But Nembhard really, that theoretical do-throughout attack where you drive in, maybe there's a shot there. If it's not, then you kick it out. That was reduced to just one strategy, and that was kicking it out. So Nembhard came out of the game earlier than maybe you would think as a starting point guard. Haliburton probably would have been a better matchup against the size of Cleveland in that way. Obviously, Haliburton's bigger. Obviously, he's a little bit more physically imposing. So if Haliburton was in this game, I think that there would have been a bit more matchup success, I suppose, across the floor. Nembhard has limits. He's a great guard. He's my favorite player on this team, and it's not even really that close. I just think maybe if Tyrese Haliburton was here, this game could have gone a different way, especially if he was playing well. The other weakness I really saw in this game was Ben Sheppard. I don't think he's really ready to be a true starting 5 player, and we know that, right? That's why he comes off the bench. That's why we know that's why he is the player that he is in terms of a role player coming off the bench. Sometimes a player getting injured doesn't matter because you replace his production perfectly. Sometimes whoever comes off the bench does just as well as Tyrese Haliburton did. We kind of saw that in the first game against the Cavaliers, but the Pacers didn't really do that very well against Cleveland the second time. Sheppard played 32 minutes, so like I said, Nembhard already is in the starting 5. He moved to point guard, and then Ben Sheppard comes in at shooting guard, but he was the 5th starter, right? He was the guy that basically came in the game for Tyrese Haliburton, even though they were playing different positions. Shepherd played 32 minutes. He had 7 points. He went 1 for 6 from the field, right? The bench performed well, but there's really no clear Haliburton replacement. No one can truly do what he does, right? Obi Toppin doesn't quite have the ball handling that he does. Shepherd doesn't have the size. TJ McConnell is just perfect at being TJ McConnell, right? He's not a Tyrese Haliburton guy necessarily. And none of them off the bench could really fill the void that Tyrese Haliburton fulfills, and that's why he's such an integral piece of this team. So really what those two issues, with Nembhard not being able to be Tyrese Haliburton and Ben Shepherd not really being able to be a full-time starter, the real motto for the Pacers that comes down to this for me is stay healthy and stay contending, right? If the Pacers are healthy, they'll be able to contend for championships the same way that they potentially were last year. The playoffs at the end of the day are about superstars, right? Championship teams need their superstars. The Celtics had Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown last year, who they played in the finals. They had Luka and Kyrie. Tyrese Haliburton was, of course, legendary last season in the playoffs. We're going to need him fully healthy, and we're going to need him playing well with a capable supporting cast around him. That supporting cast is there. This roster is capable of anything, in my opinion. We need Tyrese Haliburton, and he needs to be at the top. He's got to be playing well. He's got to be fully healthy. So the questions that brings up regard load management, right? That, to me, is an acceptable approach. The Pacers, with how honestly bad the East is, the Pacers are probably, if they continue on this trajectory, going to be in the playoffs, and they're probably going to have a top 4 seed, if we're being honest, if they continue to excel at this level. They're 6-1 in 2025. That's incredible marks, and even though they had a slow start, everything is in reach, right? The 1 seed might be out of reach. The 2 seed might be out of reach. The 3 seed, for all we know, might be out of reach. But it feels like everything else in the East is within reach for the Pacers, good and bad. So load management. If there's if there's a back-to-back night on the road, something like that, if Tyrese has a weird night physically, I think it's totally okay to, and you don't even need to take him out of the game entirely, but I just think it's totally okay to give him some rest, whether or not he has reduced minutes or comes off the bench or whatever it is. I think we need to make sure that we have Tyrese in the playoffs, because at this point, if we continue playing this way, I think we can be in the playoffs, because again, this team without Tyrese Haliburton beat and then was very close with the best team in the league, in the conference, twice in a row in a little span. Sure, the Pacers are on a hot streak, but if they're going to get hot towards the playoffs and have an opportunity to maybe qualify for the NBA Finals and maybe win it, you're going to have Tyrese Haliburton healthy at that time. The Pacers can win without him, but I don't think they can win without him in the playoffs. So load management is a totally acceptable approach. I'm interested to see if that's what Rick Carlisle and this Pacers staff ends up going to. But really, just take some pressure off Haliburton, especially now that Nembhard is back. Again, he doesn't have to miss entire games, but keep him active, keep him hot, keep him in his groove, but keep him protected, especially as he first comes back from this injury. I think we should ease him back into the lineup because, again, the Pacers can win games without Tyrese. They can win big games without Tyrese Haliburton. I just don't think that once you get to the playoffs, they'll be able to win, 3, 4, 7-game series in a row without him, or certainly without him at 100%. So I want to see Tyrese Haliburton be fully healthy for the playoffs, and I want to see the Pacers succeed in the playoffs, and I think that's fully possible based on what I saw both times against the Cavaliers. But for now, they're going to struggle against some of those top teams without their star player in the lineup. Okay, let's talk about IU basketball. Let's get really, really negative, and then let's get hopeful for the Purdue, and then let's get a little bit speculative about the Washington Commanders. Let's talk about IU basketball. They need a hard reset. When I say hard reset, you probably could assume what I mean. I don't like calling for people's jobs. I don't want to say that someone should be fired. I don't want to say that someone should not be employed where they currently are anymore, right? Like that from a fundamental human level, that feels wrong. But whatever the solution would be, IU basketball needs a hard reset. They lost to Illinois 85-69 the other day. It was a hyped-up game, a ranked opponent, at Assembly Hall. This is, to me, now was the most hyped-up game of the year. And I said that to a couple people that potentially were going to consider going to the game. I said that I think this will be the most hyped-up game. I think when you get there, this will be the biggest game of the year, right? Because Indiana still, we didn't know they were bad yet. There's a lot of ranked teams that are going to come to Assembly Hall this season. Maybe Purdue's the one exception in terms of the Purdue game in Assembly Hall will still be bigger than this one, even if Indiana, their season falls by the wayside. But regardless, this is a ranked opponent when we think Indiana still has a chance of maybe playing their way into the top 25, playing their way into the NCAA tournament. And now that they lost this way, it's honestly in the cards for IU to not win more than one more conference game throughout the year. I was looking at the schedule and I was seeing what the worst case scenario could be. And after we saw how Washington played against Purdue last night, that home game might not even necessarily be a win. I think Indiana's mismanaged. And I think that the way that because they have talent on the roster, and I know Malik Reneau's out, but I feel like Indiana's being mismanaged. And I think that was really part of the problem in the Illinois game. Of course, you have the effort issue. Of course, you have intensity issues. And of course, you have a team that doesn't quite have a winning culture right now, partially because everybody is new. It's a conglomeration of transfers in some ways. And Mike Woodson hasn't necessarily done the best job doing more with less, right? His successful seasons were filled with guys like Jalen Hood-Schifino, for example. Those star players are going to go to the NBA. This is an IU team that doesn't necessarily have any NBA guys on it. And you don't need NBA guys to win in college. If there's anything we've learned, if Loyola Chicago could go to the Final Four, right, really anybody can. And even if you look at Purdue, just on the north side of the state, that's a team that, to me, doesn't really have necessarily very many NBA guys. Braden Smith maybe, but Purdue's roster right now doesn't look like it's NBA has NBA talent on it. Indiana doesn't either. That's totally fine. You don't need that necessarily to succeed at the collegiate level. This team is built to succeed in the backcourt, and this is the number one point I'm going to bring up in this segment. Indiana is built to succeed in the backcourt. They have one true great big in Amar Ballo. That's really their only guy, which is fine. That's a totally acceptable way to build a team. Have one key center and build out a great backcourt. That's kind of what Purdue's doing, right? Trey Keffin-Wren is really the only big man on the team that can really succeed, especially now that Jacobson is hurt. But they've got a backcourt that is loaded with sharpshooters. Braden Smith, Fletcher Loyer, CJ Cox. I don't want to just compare the two teams, but I think there are parallels. Illinois bullied Amar Ballo down low, right? They really focused on the front court. And that's fine because if Illinois is scoring down low, that can be compensated by great shooting outside from that backcourt that Indiana has sort of built their team around. But they shot 38.5% from the field, and they were 4 for 18 from 3. I think they were 0 for 14. They were certainly 0 for something in double digits at a point in this game, right? So this team is built on their backcourt. Their backcourt is where their talent is outside of Amar Ballo. Their front court is not where they should be winning games, but Amar Ballo really has been the only consistent player all year. He's been putting up double-doubles game after game after game. And even if there's lapses defensively, if there's issues defensively, Indiana on offense doesn't have the production from the backcourt that they should, and they spent so much focus on the backcourt in the offseason. And what's so frustrating is how hyped up this team was in the preseason. If we knew this team was going to be bad, it'd be a different thing. But this roster, again, had a ton of hype. The talent on this roster was chalked up to be a top 20 team, and they were a top 20 team in the AP poll preseason. And its backcourt and its shooting ability was really what this transfer class and recruiting class was chalked up to be successful at. And in some ways, they left the front court kind of as the weaker area of the floor. They just said, all right, we'll bring in Amar Ballo, we'll put him down there, we'll let him figure it out. Again, that's totally fine if you're shooting well and if you have good backcourt play. And Indiana just doesn't. They can't put up good shots, and the ones they do put up, it feels like they miss. The backcourt has just been absolutely atrocious in these two blowout losses to Iowa and Illinois. And Amar Ballo is not going to be able to win the game on his own down low, even if he's one-on-one with another big man down there and there's no one else really penetrating the blocks. Amar Ballo still is not going to be able to win the game on his own down there. Therefore, because of that mismanagement of the fact that, again, their talent is in the backcourt, they're putting their focus on the backcourt, and it's just not prevailing. It's not working. And that's part of why the Indiana Hoosiers are objectively a bad basketball team right now. The other issue to me is depth, and this happens when you take a ton of transfers. If you build a starting five through the transfer portal, you might not have a lot of depth. And right now, after Malik Reneau got hurt, it feels like IU doesn't have a true fifth starter, right? There's very little depth on this team. There's no one behind Amar Ballo that can come in and really, truly succeed, right? It doesn't feel like they have a fifth starter. And Mackenzie Mbako has had 10 total points as a starter since January 5th. Since January 5th in those 3 games, he's had 4.0 points and 6 points. That's horrific. He's been shooting horrifically as well, of course, those 3 games. Trey Galloway is not consistent at all. He could drop 10 in a game. He can drop 0 in a game. That's both happened in the last month. Nothing for this team has been consistent at all, especially since the injury of Renault, besides Amar Ballo, and he's left to fend to himself. It's completely shameful, in my opinion, for Indiana, the way they are and the fact that this program in the Big Ten at all, but this historical blue blood program in the Big Ten, they're performing this way. I think it's shameful. What really stresses me out for them is the upcoming stretch of the schedule. There's an outcome in the world where IU only wins really one more conference game. And if you want to look at their next 7, they have, I would say, an easier stretch on the way. They go to Ohio State. They'll play that game on Fox. It's either on Friday or Saturday night. They go to Northwestern, and they host Maryland. I think at Ohio State is an instant loss. I think Maryland at home is an instant loss. Maryland's been playing well. Maybe they go to Northwestern and win. I guess at the end of the day, they went to Penn State and won, so Indiana really could be capable of anything. But that's their first stretch. And then they go at number 17 Purdue, at number 23 Wisconsin, versus number 20 Michigan, and at number 12 Michigan State. They play 4 ranked teams in the Big Ten, 3 of them on the road after a 3-game streak that I don't even think they're going to come out of above 500 in the confines of that 3-game stretch. So Indiana's got a real difficult group of tests coming up, right? They have a real difficult time on the way. Purdue, Wisconsin, Michigan, MSU, Ohio State, Northwestern, Maryland. Mike Woodson is maybe facing potentially losing his job in that 7-game stretch. I would not be surprised if IU makes a head coaching change in the middle of the year. And I think this 7-game stretch is where it could happen. After that MSU game, if they win one game or less, then obviously the season's over. But certainly there's going to be some major questions about the future of Indiana. Mike Woodson has been in Indiana for 4 years, 76 and 45, 2 NCAA tournament appearances in his first 2 years. But again, think about the NBA talent that they had on those teams. Sure, maybe if they were recruited by him, that's one thing. But he hasn't been able to do more with less in the era of the transfer portal, in the era of NIL, and then the era of maybe IU not having a clear NBA guy on the team. Mike Woodson and really just hasn't been able to put a team on the floor that's capable of further success past the first 2 years of his tenure. So what's got to change, right? There's got to be a more intense and driven culture. They understood that about the football program. They bring in Cignetti, and look what happened after that. You need a new look. You need a new feel. You need a new appeal to recruits and transfers. When you look at IU and you need to think something different than what you're looking at right now, you have to make IU a place for winning, right? Right now, it feels like an NBA fast track because Mike Woodson has ties to the NBA. That's part of the pitch to recruits, right? Is if you come here, you can be like Trayce Jackson-Davis, you can be like Jalen Hood-Schifino. And I feel like we do have a sense of personal success being the driver for some of these players. Let's make it a place for winning basketball games. Let's make it a place for winning basketball championships again. Recruit and then build a philosophy around your guys. They have talent, but I just don't think they're using it the right way. And if they continue to bring in talent, as they probably will because they are IU, you have to use that talent in the correct way. They haven't been recently. It worries me for the future, and I'm interested to see if IU and Mike Woodson, especially under Mike Woodson, if they're able to make anything happen following this. Okay, let's talk about Purdue. A little bit. Purdue's been real fun, and part of why Purdue's been so fun is because IU's been so bad. But Purdue is an incredibly entertaining team to watch, an incredibly entertaining team to root for. They play Oregon on Saturday, and that game is a whole lot more important than you might think. Purdue played Washington last night. They won by, I believe, 11, something along those lines. They honestly were down for most of the first half. They weren't quite shooting well. They couldn't hit a three-pointer, and then they got hot at the start of the second, pulled away, and it was game over from there. So they weren't shooting well, and then all of a sudden Fletcher Loyer got hot, and Braden Smith got hot, and they all slowly started breaking that paper ceiling of hitting a three-pointer, and Purdue ran away with it. Let's talk about the Oregon game, though. On Saturday, this game means a lot. It's both teams are jockeying for position at the top of the Big Ten. There are 6 teams separated by 2 games at the top of the Big Ten Conference. Purdue's looking to catch up to those Michigan schools. Remember, Purdue dropped that game to Penn State earlier in the year. Michigan and Michigan State are both, I believe, 5-0 in the conference at the moment. And Oregon's looking to remain relevant for the conference title, right? Oregon right now has 2 losses. They're 5th or 6th. I believe they're 5th actually in the Big Ten, but of course it's a tie down there. So picking up a 3rd loss would actually put them in the same conference record area as Indiana, who's 4-3 at the moment. But Purdue is looking to stay really close behind Michigan, Michigan State. Oregon's looking to not fall by the wayside because they have some tough games coming up as well. They catch Purdue at home. This team in Oregon is 15-2. They're 4-2 in conference. They're number 13 in the country. They're 5th in the Big Ten. As I said, they've won 4 of their last 5 games. They're coming off a narrow win at Penn State. That's Purdue's only conference loss. They've had close wins as well against Ohio State and Maryland. Interestingly, Oregon is not top 68 in almost all categories. In statistically, they're not top 68 in almost all those categories, at least the significant ones. 13th in the country in the AP poll because they have a resume conducive to being a top 13, top 15 team in the nation. So objectively, this is a great moment to boost your resume for both teams. It's a great moment to cement yourself at the top of the Big Ten in the standings, just from a record standpoint. In that way, Oregon, very successful team this year, but they've had some close games, albeit against good teams, some of them on the road in the Big Ten. They've had some close games recently. This roster for Oregon is very interesting because they don't play like most college basketball teams do. Their leading scorer is their center, and Nate Biddle. That's totally normal. He's likely going to win the rebounding battle over Trey Coppen-Wren. Trey Coppen-Wren's not the best rebounder in the country anyway. I imagine that Nate Biddle's going to win for the Ducks down low in that regard. They have a trio of guards as well, led by Jackson Shelstead. Shifty, elusive guards that hit tough shots. This team scores, and they score a lot because they put up a lot of shots, right? Oregon shoots all the time. Every possession, it feels like they're shooting a field goal or a three-pointer of some kind. Oregon, in a lot of ways, partially for that reason and others, plays like an NBA team, right? They feel, to me, more like a team predicated on isolated success, right? Jackson Shelstead will take the ball up the floor, and he'll just take it himself, and whether or not he finds a tough jumper that he twists into at the elbow or kicks it out for a three, something along those lines, Oregon plays like an NBA team. It feels like solo success added up to create a winning team. And so that's why one of the key matchups in this game is the battle of philosophies, right? Purdue relies on ball movement. They have elite backcourt performance. They're able to shoot and score at a high rate from outside. And Purdue is one of the best teams at assisting the basketball as well. They create shots. They create space for their shooters. They move the ball around a lot. They move around the ball very effectively. Oregon, on the other hand, relies on solo play more, right? Biddle's going to reel in rebounds. He's going to keep the offense afloat, but they're just going to put up a ton of shots. And Shelstead's going to be the number one guy there. Shelstead is similar to an NBA player in the sense that he can just take over a game on his own. Purdue, in a lot of ways, spreads the ball around more and wins as a team more. So can the Oregon players beat the Purdue team? That's really the question for this basketball game in a couple of days. It's that battle of philosophy, and it's the battle of the front court. I said that Nate Biddle probably was going to win the battle of the front court, and I think I'm right. Purdue's not a very good rebounding team, but for the most part, it's just Trey Coppen-Wren versus Biddle, Nate Biddle one-on-one, and that's mostly all there is to it. So if Trey Coppen-Wren does manage to win the front court, Purdue could just cruise to victory, and that could be incredible to watch, and Purdue would pick up a big-time road win. We saw them struggle out of the gate against Washington the other day. Road environment, way out west. They haven't done that for a conference game yet before, and now they're playing Oregon, again, in a conference game on the road. They might struggle to start. And if those guards start to take over and Shelstead gets hot and Nate Biddle is dominating the blocks, Oregon gets out to a lead. The question is whether or not Purdue on the road can keep their composure and come back with that. They did not shoot well early on against Washington. They figured it out in the second half. Are they going to shoot poorly again against Oregon? West Coast road game in the Big Ten for the first time. We'll see how Purdue does against the number 13 team in the country. Once again, Purdue has one conference loss. They're a game behind Michigan and Michigan State. Oregon would be 3 games back with a loss, which is at this point nearly insurmountable with how many teams are in the Big Ten, with how many teams are jockeying position at the top, the fact that not all of those teams play one another throughout the year, right? 3 games back from the lead, as we're approaching the halfway point into conference play, that might be an insurmountable deficit if they're trying to win the conference. So Oregon trying to stay relevant at the top of the league, right, to potentially win the Big Ten. Purdue could add another top 25 win. They would advance to 3-3 versus the top 25. Remember, they're 2-3. They have a losing record against top 25 teams, which is significant because if we're considering, like I am, considering Purdue to be a team that can make another deep run in the NCAA tournament, you've got to be able to beat top 25 teams. This is a great example on the road against a team that's similar standing to them at the top of the conference in the Big Ten. Very key opportunity for Purdue to go on the road and pick up a massive win for their NCAA tournament resume, a massive win for their standing in the Big Ten, and a massive win across the board to prove that they're capable of doing something difficult like this on the road. Whatever they do in Mackey is whatever they do in Mackey, but you don't play in Mackey Arena in the NCAA tournament. So Purdue going on the road to play Oregon and winning resoundingly against especially an Oregon team as good as they are and as dangerous as they are, Purdue would have a lot of potential all year long. This is a great chance for them to prove themselves. I hope that they are able to, and I can't wait to see how it goes. Okay, that's good. That's it for Indiana. I want to talk about the NFL playoffs. I want to talk about the Washington Commanders and what would happen if they beat the Lions and how they could beat the Lions. Where things stand right now are pretty clear, cut, and dry, right? It's the division round of the playoffs. The Detroit Lions are the 1 seed. They're at home. They're 15-2, but they've been absolutely decimated with injuries. With that said, they've made it work all year. They're still 15-2, despite those injuries that they suffered all year long. And they're likely going to get David Montgomery back when we get to that point for this game. He will play. So for the Lions, the Super Bowl window is open. They're contending. They have the NFC playoffs entirely at home. There's no clear world beater in the NFL right now. The Chiefs aren't the Chiefs of old, right? There's really no one. If anyone's the world beater, it's the Lions. But with how injured they are, I wouldn't consider them to be that unstoppable force. But still, a lot of openness to the Super Bowl this year, and Detroit Lions, their Super Bowl window is absolutely open. I'm interested to see if they have the ability to go out and win this one. Washington, on the other hand, they're a true wild card team, right? They're a 6 seed. They pulled off a miracle season just in year one with Jaden Daniels. They draft a quarterback. They turn around. They make the playoffs as a wild card team. They're playing with house money. They've long exceeded every single one of their goals and expectations for this season. So at this point, beating the Lions would just be a Super Bowl level amount of euphoria, right, for the Commanders. After all they've been through, the Commanders would really, really appreciate a win like this. It'd be, again, a euphoric season, unimaginable joy. It'd feel like they won the Super Bowl because this is as far as the Commanders have gotten in years. And this fan base really does deserve a success story like this one after all that they've been through with the Dan Snyder stuff. And, they move on from head coaches and they find themselves where they are now. The impact for Detroit is a bit more grim. If Detroit were to lose this game, right, their Super Bowl window is temporary, as all are. They'd be running out of time to keep these players healthy and young and not being forced to pay them as much as maybe they would in the future. This is a fan base that truly deserves it, right? Truly deserves the Lions Super Bowl. It's been forever, and they've been waiting on this forever. They're capable of it. Is this the year? Maybe not. I made a whole video on it. I probably shouldn't have, honestly, but I made a video about how I didn't think the Lions were going to win the Super Bowl. Got a ton of views, got a ton of hate comments, and the Commanders, if they were to end it for the Lions, that would be massively unexpected. And like I said, maybe it's not the year for the Detroit Lions to actually win it all, but for it to end this way would be tragic. And that would make this season feel like a failure. And of course, you kind of get a free pass with all the injuries, but it'd feel like a true disappointment if the Lions lost this way in this game to the Commanders. But if it happened, how would it happen? Right? If the Commanders put off the upset, how would it happen? To me, it comes entirely down to Jaden Daniels, right? Washington's offensive strength is the ground game. They're top 5 in just about every rushing category, which is partially dictated by just how much they do run. They have 31 rushes a game. It's just under 50%, which is a lot because it's a passing league now. So if you're running the ball half the time, that's a decent amount of the time, right? So the Commanders, with Jaden Daniels, a rookie quarterback and a running quarterback, but a rookie quarterback, Commanders rush a lot, right? Detroit is physical up front, and they're injured in the secondary, right? They're holding teams to under 100 yards on the ground on average. They're the number 2 most, get this, all right? They're the number 2 in the league most often rushed against team. So the teams that the Lions face attempt rushes more than just about against any other team in the league, right? And still, the Lions are holding teams to under 100 yards on the ground on average per game. The Lions are physical up front. They're going to really give Brian Robinson Jr. a hard time. They're going to give the Commanders' rushing attack a very hard time. Now, Terrion Arnold is back, but the secondary has been largely destroyed by injury. So Jaden Daniels, the question there is whether or not he's going to be able to push the ball down the field enough to keep up with Detroit's high-octane offense, And similarly, whether or not they can get the run game going to really provide that balance. Because again, this would be tragic for the Lions if this is the way their season ends. And for the Commanders, it would be a new level of success that they've never seen. It would inspire, even especially if they don't win a Super Bowl this year, which they probably won't. It inspires a lot of hope for the future under Jaden Daniels and makes a lot of people think that maybe the Commanders would be capable of doing it. I want you to imagine the Washington Commanders in the Super Bowl, because I can't, right? That's not a memory that works in my head. That doesn't make sense to see those colors in the Super Bowl and see that logo in the Super Bowl, right? It's effectively a brand new football team with all the rebranding and Jaden Daniels in there now. If the Commanders can get there and the Commanders can do it, that's one thing. But it just would inspire a lot of hope for the future for this football team if they were able to beat the Lions. Can Jaden Daniels push the ball down the field enough to keep up with the Detroit Lions? That's how they can make it close. From there, there's a whole lot more you got to do to actually win the game down the stretch. But if Jaden Daniels can push the ball down the field enough against this Detroit Lions secondary, and if he can have the opportunity to do so because there's balance on offense, if the run game is going, the Commanders might have a chance. It's not worth a full preview. It's an Indiana sports show, right? And this is a game that is more likely to go one direction than the other. But regardless, the question of whether or not the Commanders are capable of doing this is absolutely worth asking and absolutely worth looking out for as this game approaches. Okay, that's all I have for you guys today. A slightly shorter episode than usual on this Thursday. Excited to get back to the show next week. We'll have a lot to talk about then. I'm sure we'll talk about the Ravens-Bills game on Tuesday. We'll have a weekend of Pacers to talk about. We'll have the national championship game in college football to talk about as well. There's going to be a lot to get to. We'll talk about the Purdue-Oregon game. Plenty to talk about on Tuesday. We'll get through it all then. Thank you so much for watching or listening to the Early Bird Podcast with Andrew Garrison. My name, of course, is Andrew Garrison. I'm very appreciative of you all. I will see you all again on Tuesday. It should be at about noon for that episode. And like I said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next week.